What is going on, my YouTube friends, my Patreon friends, all my audio friends, my drum nerd friends? What's going on, everyone? I think this might be a fun video for us. I'm actually currently mixing some drums, and I thought, what a great way to take a break from drums is to listen to some more drums. I love Rick Beato's channel, man. I'm like constantly on his channel watching videos. And our friend Monty sent this to me from the Discord. I believe you're a Patreon member too, though. Anyways, and I thought this would be super interesting and like super time appropriate because, like I said, I'm mixing drums right now for a project I can't talk too much about, but I'm really excited about. And I was gonna talk about my process, but like, I don't know if he's gonna talk about like compression to EQ chain, signal chains. I don't know if he's gonna talk about miking. I don't know if he's just gonna talk about like buses. I don't know if he's gonna talk about plugins. I don't know where he's gonna go with this. And I was a live guy. Like most of this, like stuff that I pull on, the experience that I pull on comes from live, and it is a little bit different in the studio. I do more mixing now, like studio mixing, but I have way more experience in live. So I think this is gonna be super interesting, man. Let's watch this. Let's
Okay,
do this.
today's going to be a fun episode. I'm going to try out some new plugins and some old plugins on a drum mix. These are some drums I recorded, oh geez, probably 20 years ago or so. Done in a big studio, room mics that make it sound like it's in a big studio. But what I'm going to do is show you what to do if you have drums and you don't have a big studio. What are some ways that you can make it sound like you're in a big room? How we can augment some of the sounds, some of the different plugins we can use for compression, for EQ, things like that. I'm going to use some old plugins. I'm going to use some brand new plugins that have just come out. So let's get started. So here we are on the track. I'm going to play from the verse part. You'll hear the basic drum sound. I'm going to go through each individual track. This is the kick drum. This is snare top. I'm going to add the snare bottom. Then the hi-hat is here. Overheads.
Okay.
There's a crash track here and a ride. And then there are some toms that happen. Now I've cleaned the tom tracks. I'm looking over here. Let's see here. I have three tom tracks. So let's find a fill that uses.
So it looks like he used. Hold on.
Here we go.
So like there's no room here. Like he's either gone in and clipped and like actually cut that out, like actually removed it and then printed the stem and put it back in here, or he's got something that like filtered it out. There's one that we're looking at called, I can't remember. I'll find a picture and I'll put it, or I'll find the name of it and I'll put it in the description box. But it worked really well. Because it's tricky because you can't just gate it until you hit the drum. Because it's a transient thing too. You need to tell it how long to let the drum breathe before it snaps back off again too, right? So there's actually like a lot that kind of goes into that, and it gets really tricky. It gets kind of complicated sometimes. The other thing that I thought was interesting was the sound of his overheads, and I wonder if that was processed or not. Like my overheads, I usually don't compress them. I don't like the sound of compressed cymbals really, unless I have to. But I do like the brittleness and like the slappiness of an overhead, and then I use a room for more like body and resonance. But I don't know. Like I said, it'll all really depend on what he captured and how he's processing it.
Here's another fill. Another fill here. These are all the drums.
You hear that bleed?
So those are the toms. And then we have the close room mics. Let's see here that I've muted. Let's see what that sounds like. You can tell it's a pretty big room. And then there's a mono mic here. Let's listen to that. That's kind of center of the drum kit. Microphone really compressed. And then we have the squashed mic here.
Yes, it is.
I'm not really using.
Sounds nice.
I'm going to mute that. I'm going to mute all these mics, the room mics here. We'll pretend like we have a drum kit that has no microphone, no room. So if you're at home and doing this kind of thing. Okay, so what are
So that's still tricky though, because like, I don't know how to describe it. When you're in a big room, the drums have like a way of exploding. And even if you don't have room mics that are far back, you're still going to capture that. You're still going to catch that off like the transients if everything's like in phase and like in good placements, right? So like just be aware of that. Like if you record and you use close mics and overheads in like a really bad room, it's not going to sound like this. And that's just something to keep in mind all the time.
Some of the things that I would do here, my sounds are actually pretty good. I'm going to group the snare tracks here. Let's say snare. So I'm going to group the snare top and bottom.
It's going to move together.
That's what they sound like together. That's a pretty good snare sound. So I'm going to send the actual drums, the snare, the bass drum, the toms, to a drum sub. So if you think of it, these are like the actual drums going to a drum sub. I'm going to compress them. Sometimes I'll send the entire drum.
It's like a group. He's probably going to talk about that a little bit more, but like once you have the balance on your kick and your snares, you don't really need to touch them anymore. You just have like a fader that does kick, snare, and hats, right? Your groove section, right?
Actual drums going to a drum sub. I'm going to compress them. Sometimes I'll send the entire drum kit to the drum sub, but I don't usually do that because what ends up happening is that you get a lot of cymbal wash when you start compressing the drum cymbals. And that's the thing that really bugs me. And I'm going to put a compressor on the drum sub. So
because you might want the release of the compressor to let the drum kind of breathe for like a little longer, but that might make your cymbal unrealistic in how long it resonates for, right? And that's always my biggest complaint about compressed cymbals is it feels like they ring out way longer than they should, or like than they did in the original recording, right? So it's a weird thing. It's a really weird thing.
What compressor am I going to use? Let me pick a plugin out. I'm going to pick out an
SSL strip
plugin. This is a TC Electronics Master X plugin.
Cool.
And I have a drum sub thing. It's a preset I just made. It's the only preset I have for it. It's adding a little bit of compression. It's also adding, I believe, a little bit of expansion too.
So what's the best way to describe that? So some things, some frequencies, some placements on the EQ are going to push down depending on how it responds and how you have it set up. And other ones are going to push up to bring them out. So say when you hit the kick drum, it's real like low and resonant, but then you start bringing in that like the top end to make it a little bit more clear, a little bit more punchy up top. Then you might get a little bit more cymbal bleed. So you might want that to pull down only when he hits the snare drum because you don't want it to lose too. Yeah, there's probably a million different things that you could do with that. But it's interesting that it does it all in one plugin.
Without it. Makes it sound a little more exciting.
You can see where like the weight of the kick drum and the snare drum are by where it's compressing the frequencies, right?
Makes it sound a little more exciting. Okay, so that's the Master X there. I'm going to bypass it, and I'm going to put a compressor on the master bus as well. I'm going to use, let's say, a Universal Audio SSL bus compressor.
Sure.
Kind of a standard thing to use. I have one in my rack here that I would use if I was using an outboard compressor. This is going to be the G-Bus, SSL G-Bus compressor here. We're going to go, a typical mix would be use a 4-to-1 ratio. I'm going to use like a slow attack.
The slow attack means like when the transient happens, how quickly does the compressor actually respond? And if you have it too quickly, you're going to get like this wobble effect. It's kind of got this thing. And if you have it too slow, then it's not going to like take your peaks off and stuff too, right? So it's kind of a sweet spot you got to dial between. Just remember it's going to be different for every mix, but it's cool to see him just like go for that.
Like a slow attack.
Just touching.
Then I'm going to get a release time that's kind of in tempo with the song. So let me loop the verse here. So if I loop the verse to the chorus like this, put my loop on.
So he's talking about when the needle moves, it kind of moves with the rhythm of the drums or with the rhythm of the song. Because if there is any like breathing to it, you almost want that. You want that impact to happen with the timing of the song, right? That's interesting though. I never thought about it that way.
And then just go. Here's without it. With it. About 3 dB of compression.
Just touching it.
Now, when I start adding other instruments to it, it's going to get more bus compression, right? So I'm going to start with just a little compression. And since we're only going to talk about the drums, we'll deal with it that way.
I'd like to take a second to talk to you about this channel. This is actually Rick Beato 2. I've had it since the beginning of my main channel, and many of you are not subscribed. As a matter of fact, 87% of the people that watch this channel regularly are not subscribed. So I encourage you to hit the subscribe button on this channel and on my main channel. This will help me get even more of my dream guests and help continue to grow both channels. Thank you.
Oh man, and Rick Beato deserves it. He is such a great interviewer, and he looks like such a chill guy to hang out with too. I'm gonna have the link to this in the description box. Please double check that you're subscribed to it. And my numbers, I think 60% of y'all coming back aren't subscribed. So double check, please. I'd appreciate it.
Once again, we're not compressing the cymbals at all. They're just going straight through to the G bus compressor through the 2 mix. So they're not getting compressed by our drum bus or our drum sub compression, which I'm going to turn on now.
The thing you have to be careful with too is if you compress the like living piss out all your drums and you don't do that to the cymbals or the overheads or anything, sometimes it feels like you have like a sampled or like a different drum kit and then different cymbals, and you want it to all feel like one. So he's using this G bus as like glue, right? It's just barely touching the compressor, just like 3 dB. It's just nicking it. It's not like super aggressive anywhere. 4-to-1 is more compression than I thought that a person would do on a bus like this. I don't even know off the top of my head what my bus compressor has. I also use a G bus on my on the bus. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting.
Here we go. A little bit too much low end. I'm going to bring the low end down on it because the kick drum's kind of rattling a little bit.
Nice.
Hear those stick drags on the snare bottom there? Well, we can either mute the snare bottom and you won't hear it.
That's probably what I do.
Now, one thing I can do with the snare bottom is I can actually compress that.
De-esser.
Let's say, oh boy, there's so many plugins here. It's almost impossible. I'm going to use a Waves compressor. I'm going to use an SSL channel strip on here.
Do the whole thing in SSL,
SSL
bro.
channel, because a lot of people have it. So I'm going to compress this.
So like an SSL E-strip, like what he's using here, imagine you have an SSL analog console in front of you, right? So now you have like your actual fader that actually does fader stuff, does volume. It's got its preamp, the in and the trim. It's got a compressor and a gate expander on it. It's got a EQ, high cut, low cut, high pass, low pass. So this is just like an analog console strip that we used to have in the analog days. In a plugin form, right? So a lot of mixing people will put this on every channel and then just use this like an analog console. So you listen to your snare drum, sounds good, you got it cracking, it all sounds great. Put it in the mix and you go, oh, I just need a little bit more high mid. So instead of going to your EQ and changing everything, you would just come to your channel strip, just like as if you had an analog console in front of you, just grab the high mid and turned it up. So a lot of people use it like that. And then there's other tricks you can use, like the glue tricks, the 6 dB thing on these strips, which I can show you all if you're interested in. But he's like actually setting the compressor to like attack and release a certain way. So I'll talk about that another time.
I'm gonna add a little 7K. That might be a little too rattly. I don't like that, honestly. It sounds a little rattly.
Sounds distorted.
I'm just going to use the snare top because the snare top seems to have a lot of power and it has a lot of top end to it. So right there, that actually makes it easier. I'm just going to take the, I'm just going to keep that muted. So I'm just going to take that plug-in off right now.
Save the CPU.
Okay, so I'm not even using the snare bottom. But one thing I can do to actually fatten up the snare a little bit more is I could either compress it, I could compress and gate it, or I can add a sample to it. And one of the things that you can do is actually make a MIDI track, which I've done. I made a MIDI drum track using the plugin Trigger, and I created a MIDI notes here using Superior Drums, and I'm using Superior Drums with the, it's called the Progressive Foundry. This is by Forrester Saville.
We use the Slate version of this.
Here's what it sounds like.
Trigger.
This is a drum I picked out. It's actually pretty similar in pitch because this is a Black Beauty.
A little lower.
Now this is adding a little bit of room sound here. I'm going to actually increase the room sound. But make overheads a little louder.
Oh, interesting. Oh, interesting. You actually get like the mix processing from the sample whenever they made the sample. Oh, okay. Because I thought he was going to add a reverb to it, but he's actually adding the room. Cool.
This is actually kind of in lieu of adding reverb, which I could do too. Our snare sounds great. It really doesn't need that much. I mean, I can compress the snare a little bit here. Let's say I take a good compressor to use on a snare drum might be something like a DBX 160, which they make a nice emulation of right here. This might be a little strong. Check it out. Ooh. I'm gonna back off the.
That's aggressive, man. Like I used to own a bunch of the 166s and 266s. They didn't respond like that.
So I'm just engaging it a little bit. When the red light goes on, you're engaging the compression. Gives a little more snap.
Really not compressed that much.
Now the thing about the bass drum sounds pretty good on its own. It's has a little bit of rumble to it.
Yeah.
This is a new thing that I just got yesterday. It's called Saturate. It's made by Newfangled Audio, and I just tried it on the bass drum. Check it out. This is without it. It's compressing it and adding a little harmonic distortion to it.
Interesting.
If you're listening to it, you're saying, you know what, the kick drum's a little bit long. Maybe it needs a gate on it. Okay, so now I'm going to actually bring in an old school plugin here. This is Metric Halo. This is one of the first channel strips, the first
Cool.
channel strip made for Pro Tools. Some people are like, oh, what do you...
Look how like complicated they made this. I'm sure if you've used this 100 times that it's like simple, but like, my God.
talking about? Believe it or not, a lot of people still use this.
I bet.
Serban Gania is a famous mixer, I understand, still uses a channel strip. I'm going to use the gate on it here. So
Shorten it up.
basically, if I just do this,
Get rid of that snare drum.
and this is a release time here, if I want to make it really short, but
So like I was saying, like the attack, it's set to auto, so it's just going to detect and whatever based on however you have it set up. But the release is how long does it actually hang on to the transient, right? So when it hits and it opens, so you set the threshold at whatever, like what's you got it at? Minus 20. So anything above minus 20 dB, it'll go through, right? And how long it stays open, you can set. So if you want the kick drum to come in and let it bleed for a minute, if you have like a sound effect or something, like in a different scenario, that might make more sense. Or if you don't have a super resonant drum and you need a little bit more resonance out of it, sometimes you can like play with the release there a little bit. You can do the same kind of with compressors if you're going to compress it, but I don't think he's hitting it very hard with a compressor. So
That's about the right thing. So here's without it. Listen. Height.
And notice like he's leaving a little bit of that bleed in there, right? He's letting the room be a room, and that's going to help glue that whole drum kit together, even just like subtly. Even if when everything else is on, you can't really hear it, it's not audible, it'll still help glue the whole thing together, right?
To me, that snare is getting a little bit too compressed here. I'm going to back it off a little bit.
The twang part of it lasts too long. Nice.
Now I'm going to bring back the superior drums, so add some ambience on it.
Great choice.
I'm going to mute the DDX. Not even sure if it actually needs that DBX. I'm going to do something that's a little less obnoxious. Maybe I'll use something like this. This is old school Bomb Factory thing that comes with Pro Tools.
It's like a 1176 kind of clone, it looks like. There you go.
Make a fast release. Slow attack. That's better.
That's like a staple. Like what he's got going on here is like a staple 1176 placement. I like that. He's got it on the 20, or sorry, the 4-to-1. Interesting. Cool.
Of course, it brings up the background ambience of the cymbals. Okay, so then I could be like, well, maybe I want to gate it a little bit, but I don't want to gate it harshly, just to bring some of the ambience down. So I'm going to copy this plugin down. Now I could really limit it like that, but that chirps a little bit.
Still got the ghost notes.
Let's listen now. Yeah.
See what he's doing. He's turning on and off. He's bypassing the plugins in different orders too, to make sure that they're actually adding to it, right? Because you can add a compressor, you can get something just slapping, and you put it in your mix and it does nothing for you. It's like you don't want to just start turning it up now and hope that it does the thing. You want it to sound right in its context, right? So that's what he's doing, and it's obviously good to see. That might even just be like muscle memory for him at this point, but it's cool to see.
We gotta lengthen the release.
There you go.
It almost doesn't even need anything because I have that really perfect, clean, superior drum snare. Added with this. I love it having the grace notes in there. I think it sounds way more natural, but that's pretty good drum sound here.
Sounds nice.
I have no EQ on the kick drum. I EQ'd it when I recorded it into Pro Tools, but
that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so
if that's just what the kick drum sounds like, then this is like, wow.
If I were to bring these room mics in, check it out. But a lot of you are not going to have room mics like that, right? So it's like, what do you do to add that room ambience? Well, you can also add just a reverb on the snare and bleed it in on maybe the kick too. So let's say I create a sub here like this.
That could get muddy quick, but we'll see.
I take this sub, let's say we're going to put it on the output here, and then the input, let's say bus 3, 4, and then I'm going to have to pick a reverb now. What's a common one here that some people might have? We could do Valhalla Room. Let's do Bright Room here.
Mine's all red, but yeah.
Sure, it sounds like in the mix.
Sounds nice.
I'll mute it.
See how the room sound? The more room you have, the further back it sounds. Like you literally push the instrument or the voice back, right? And that's an effect of a big room. If you're in a big, huge, echoey, chambery room, you probably feel further away from whatever it is that you're referencing from, right?
I'm gonna label this drum verb, and let me take it from the verse again. I'll turn off that Master X. Turn off the. I'm going to adjust the. I'm going to bring up the snare, superior drum snare. Bring down the real snare.
I think it doesn't sound as crispy as the real snare. The real snare is less boxy, I think.
If I added a little bit of reverb onto the kick, I'm going to go bus 3, 4. Let's see what it sounds like here. You might think to yourself, well, why did you put a gate on the kick and then you added reverb on the kick? Well,
You want it to sound like it's in the same room, right? And the gate is more about the tone, and then the room sound is more about like the expression, I guess. And you probably wouldn't do this on a fast song either. If it was like I think the metronome's at 94 beats per minute. Yeah. You wouldn't want to do this on a fast one. It would get really muddy.
to yourself, well, why did you put a gate on the kick and then you added reverb on the kick? Well, I want to put the kick in the same space. It doesn't necessarily need it. Once you put the bass in, that reverb's going to get soaked up, and you may say, I don't like the sound of reverb on the bass drum, okay, that it actually muddies the bottom end up. But it really depends on what else is going on. Sometimes some reverb on the bass drum actually sounds cool. But I'm gating the kick drum to take out any of the spill from the snare drum. So adding that reverb in actually gives it a little bit more length. Makes it sound like it's in the same room. What happens if I put that reverb on the snare drum from Superior Drums? Listen. Now I'm going to mute the reverb.
It's like powdery.
And
There it is.
the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some reverb to these toms when they come in. So let me find a tom fill. So I'm going to go and just put.
See, and like this is something that's interesting too. They're just having all the options doesn't mean you need to use them, right? Like I've seen a lot of mixes. I've even done mixes where we use like a snare verb and then a drum verb for whatever reason. But I honestly think that you should just use one for the drum kit unless you have to use multiples, because it should sound like it was recorded in one room. I don't want my tom to sound like it was in this cathedral and the snare drum to sound like it was in your basement, right? Like I want it to sound like it's in the track at the same time.
A little bit of EQ on the toms. I'm just going to blend in some reverb on the toms here.
Ooh. Big and boomy.
One of the toms really has a lot of bottom end here. Let's see here.
Yeah, it does.
This thing is really That we don't need. That's probably,
Just gonna get
I'm
rid of
going to
it.
just clean that right now.
And then, so it's important, like when you do hard cuts like this, you don't have to all the time. Sometimes it sounds cool when you don't do this, but you should kind of close that off, and you'd probably do it again here because you'll hear the mic channel come back in. But before a hard cut, like you can hear that just go and it's gone, right?
I'm also going to clean it on these things, that downbeat. I'm going to clean the cymbal spill off the downbeat. I'm going to take the, let's see here. See what this sounds like. Nice. That'll be a nice clean. Listen to the downbeat.
Nice.
Pretty good. Take out everything else. Once you add things to the mix, it's going to start eating up that reverb. You're going to probably want to, you may want to take the bass drum and send it to its own reverb, and maybe take a little bit of low end out of it, so you're not really getting the low end of the bass drum in the reverb as much, and you're getting just the attack to kind of still gets
Like,
the room.
it like dissipates. It's like, you know what I mean? That's kind of the vibe you want. I was doing that during Jonah's drum solo a little bit, but you have to kind of like play with it, because when he starts playing the kick drums fast, you want to still hear the clarity of it, right?
As much, and you're getting just the attack to kind of still gets the room excited, but you're not getting that woofiness of the reverb on there. But this is a good sounding fake room.
Sounds nice.
So that's a great way to use some simple plugins. I just used a simple reverb. I used some compression on the mix bus, just on the drums, not on the cymbals, and I used some compression on the actual mix, or the drum sub. I use compression, and then the mix bus I use compression. Not a lot, but enough. And then I'm using reverb, and I'm using that sample from Superior Drums. I mean, there's many other drums. That's just one I picked that I think sounds good with our snare. I could actually tune it to be right in tune with our snare. Listen. They actually sound pretty good together.
Yeah,
but
they do.
I can try other snares. Let's see here.
How cool.
Here's what it sounds.
Different vibe though.
That has way more bottom end.
Way more.
That snare has way more bottom end. So you hear our snare mixed with this. I'm going to mute that.
Big snare drum.
Wow.
It's not bad, actually.
Let's try a different one here.
Let's just sell a bunch of these.
The Zildjian one here. No, I'm not nuts about that. Let's see here.
Oof.
You want something that sounds like a metal snare? Now that one I would probably put I would tame the ring on that, because this, if you go to the mixer here and you go to the snare, you can actually put plugins here.
No way.
In the effects, and I go to dynamics and do frequency gate. There's things you can do there, or you can just put a gate after this, and you can reduce the ring of the snare. So let's say I just do I'm going to do like a fab filter gate, which is a really good gate. Here's without the gate.
Quite the difference, actually. Punchy.
Here's without the gate. My threshold, I'm hitting this a little too hard. That's why it's going into the red there. A lot of possibilities here with this. So these are just some simple ways. I know you're thinking, that doesn't seem that simple. simple ways to
Pretty
use
simple.
a little bit of compression. I'm not even really EQing anything. I'm just taking these sounds that I recorded really well to begin with, but I'm augmenting the snare, which by itself, I could sit here and work with the sound if I wanted to have that snare and make it sound fatter. But since I don't really have rooms, I'm going to use that that sample from Superior Drums, use that MIDI trigger to actually give the snare more body and to also excite the reverb. And it doesn't have any spill from the cymbals in it, which is really cool. That's all for now. Leave a comment, hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching.
Great video, y'all. Great video. Let me pull this off. My biggest takeaways, man, are like, make the best of it, right? So obviously that was recorded really well in a really nice studio. And instead of like going crazy and adding a whole bunch of plugins, like just get a sample. That's fine. You're just duplicating what you played. And like he didn't go crazy with it. Like if he was compressing it 20-1, like on the kick drum, it's like the performance would have been bad, right? So like there is a couple things to take from that. One is, you know, have dope recordings and dope musicians. That's great. But the other is like it doesn't have to be that complicated. It really doesn't. It really shouldn't if it was recorded properly. And it can still be recorded properly in improper rooms, right? You can still have your microphones placed correctly. You can still have your drums in tune. You can still have like dry recordings and make like a hell of a performance out of them. It's all about the input. If you have good input, you get good output, right? But this is a cool video, y'all. If there's any other ones you want to go through, let me know. When I can share the mixes that I'm working on right now, I will. And I'm biting at the teeth or whatever it is to get those going for y'all. It's really exciting, man. They sound really cool. Wow, this was a long one. All right, we'll see you on the next one. Go subscribe to Rick Beato too. I got the link in the description box. We'll see you soon.